good to see you all here today, especially for our plenary. There must be some 50 people here, no? So a great turnout, so well done. I think first and foremost, a big thank you to Paul Skinner, the General Manager here at Gravetye, to Megan Stevens, the Events and Marketing Coordinator, for hosting today, and of course our very own George Blogg and his team for what was a wonderful lunch. And you really so well done. I hope he's coming out soon, is he?
He is.
The meeting today and every plenary serves as a platform for open dialogue and an opportunity to exchange ideas that can shape the path forward for the Academy. So please use it. We have an opportunity to push forward with renewed vigour and with new goals, whilst respecting the values of the Academy. It is time to look at ourselves and help rebuild our wonderful industry. We are looking for people to step forward and join the various committees to really help move forward with the Academy. I feel your presence here is a testament to your commitment to RACA. So please stick with it and move forward. Now, I shall hand you over to Lisa Jenkins, who's going to go through the agenda. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd just like to echo John's comments and thank Paul and Megan and all of the front of house team here and the kitchen team, who we'll hopefully see a bit more of in a second or so. Also, thank you to Gillian Thompson, who has sponsored the wine today. So thank you very much to Gillian and that team. And I'd also like to say thank you to Daniel and Ollie for coordinating today and bringing everybody together and making sure everyone gets here at the right time. So thank you to them. So being here today, and I have worked in the industry for some time, but have never been to Gravetye and never experienced George's food or the service here, and now I know why George is an MCA, a Master of Culinary Arts, because today was just, I mean, our table were just some of the petit fours as well, and the flavours on the dishes were just extraordinary, so thank you again. For those of you who don't know, the original part of this manor house was built in 1598. 425 years old, the original part of this building, which is incredible. And was bought by Jeremy and Elizabeth Hoskin in 2010. And I think George has been here about 8 years of that since. Is that right, George? How many?
9.5.
9. So George is hiding over here, everybody. 9.5 years. So the second part of my job today is to give you all a quick update on some of the activities of the Academy. So here goes. Last weekend we welcomed another 9 new academician members to RACA. We hosted them and a few friends and associates at the Rotunda at King's Cross. That means this year we've signed up 34 new members, and we're delighted to see the academician membership growing. We're also delighted to have 3 new associate members, including Evergrow, Grand Cuisine and Exclusive Ranges, with 2 or 3 more in the pipeline. And we've got Evergrow, Grand Cuisine and Exclusive Ranges with us here today. I can't find them, they're on this table and that table there. So thank you for coming and thank you for joining the Academy. Elka and Simon, thank you for getting your clients on board as part of the Academy. We appreciate that very much. If you haven't seen our new website that we are testing and tweaking, so please let us have any comments if we've made any mistakes or we've missed anybody off. Please pop on and have a look. We'll be loading the membership directory onto it as well before the end of the year, so there'll be a members only area of the website where you'll all be able to go on and network with each other. We hope you like the new look and feel. It's much different, very much different to what it looked like 6 months ago. So please go and let us have any comments. And do let us know if there's anything that needs amending. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Daniel. Everybody's contributed to the website, including Juliet on Adopt a School, and we've all had a bit of a say in the new website, but Daniel has project managed it. So thank you, Daniel. You've done an incredible job, so thank you very much. We've refreshed our mission statement too. We had a strategy meeting back in July. I'd like to read it to you, and just if any of you again have any comments about our new mission statement, please let us know. The Royal Academy is leading the hospitality profession by example, shaping its future through education. Leading the hospitality profession by example requires the Royal Academy of Culinary Arts members to work within the sector to help secure the future through education and training of young people. Shaping a future through education involves recognising and rewarding talent and skill within the industry, raising standards and awareness of food provenance, cooking and service through example, and connecting like-minded people who support the Academy's ethos. I hope you'll all agree that that's a good mission statement to take the Royal Academy of Culinary Arts forward for the next however many years before we decide on a new mission statement and change things again in the future, which I'm sure we will. We've launched the Annual Awards of Excellence for 2024 with a new honorary president, Phil Howard, which has been very well received, and John and I went and had a very quick...
John, and with us, funded the kitchen at Plumpton, so he's going to be driving that even more here in Sussex. Our next Adopt a School event is on Thursday the 8th. Some of you may know Peter Taylor, academician, who yesterday ran the Route 66 marathon at almost 75 in 4 hours and 4.5 hours for Adopt a School. So if you have seen an email from him about fundraising and supporting him, please do, I'm sure, or even just drop him a note to say well done, because it's amazing. It's amazing. So I just wanted to share that with you. But other than that, thank you to everybody who supports Adopt a School. And if you want to speak to me about it, please do. Back to Lisa.
Thank you, Helena. Now, the main event. Let me introduce you to George Blogg, MCA, Executive Head Chef of Gravetye Manor, and Tom Coward, the hotel's head gardener, who will talk to us all about the relationship between kitchen and garden.
Tom's just walked in from the garden, so bear with him while he gets his breath back. First of all, thank you so much for coming all the way down here. It's a privilege to host this event. And yeah, I mean, we're not going to try and plug Gravetye. We're just going to talk to you hopefully about what we think we do well here. I think a lot of places in the UK have excellent hospitality and excellent food. And I think we probably do that too. But what our USP, I think, here is the relationship between the kitchen, garden, and the kitchen. On the back of your menu, there's a little diagram that I drew of the kitchen garden, and we put that in the menu to try and help explain to the guests when they eat here, trying to help them link those two things together. They can go and wander around it. It's up there. It's an oval wall Victorian kitchen garden designed primarily to feed everyone who worked on the estate, which is about the same amount of people that we feed on a daily basis here. We've just got to make the food taste nice rather than just sustain them. So Tom, who's our head gardener here, and brilliant, is going to talk a bit about the cultural heritage significance of it all. If anyone has got any questions at all throughout what we're talking about, we're pretty open to people putting their hands up and asking anything.
Yeah. Please, any questions, do shout out. And thank you so much, Chef, for inviting me to talk to you. It's very nice to come into the warm and see that. See, really, it's just so important in what we do that the people working in the operation need to see what the guest sees and experience what the guest sees, and an important part is looking as much as seeing, or seeing rather than looking, you know, and always to be in looking out. And my relationship with hospitality started badly. This is the third hotel I've worked in. The first one was in the 90s on the Isle of Wight. At the age of 18 I worked in the evenings as a waiter. It was like some set up like 40 Towers, and I hated every minute of it, and I said I'd never work in hospitality again. The second place I worked at was in New Zealand, and I'd become an experienced gardener by then, and I had the opportunity to run a kitchen garden for a chef, whilst the permanent gardener had to have, she had an operation. And I completely fell in love with hospitality, the experience of showing or sharing with a guest the pleasures that I can get from growing and eating, and to work with a chef and put that together on the plate was wonderful. And I started here in 2010, and it was very exciting for me because this is a heritage garden and one that I've always loved, and it had become derelict, and it was our job to really restore the garden and bring it back to be an integral part of the business, where the heritage and the business would support each other. The kitchen garden was derelict, and Mr. Hoskins, the owner at the time, said, I don't see the point in growing fruit and vegetables. I can buy beetroot very cheaply, commercially grown in Spain or even in the UK, and by economy of scales, well, it's really cheap. And they're wise words, and we went away and thought about it, and as part of my training is to look and analyse a site, to look at its key potential and to find objectives for the future management. And really we came up with 3 core principles of our beautiful walled garden. I hope, has anyone seen it yet?
Not yet.
I'll go quickly because it will get dark and you won't get a chance. But the main objectives with this beautiful space are primarily the heritage value. These walled gardens fed whole communities. They fueled the Industrial Revolution, and it is really rare to see one being used as it was originally intended, feeding the original manor. So the first thing was the heritage. The second thing, productivity. It's a good point that we can grow fruit and vegetables, where we can buy them very cheaply, but you can't buy the same flavours that we can grow. And the value of that difference is massive when we come down to a high-end market, especially when you're dealing with someone like Chef. So he is able to put unique ingredients together with his special flair to create something exceptional, and sharing that with the guests is the most wonderful thing. If you look down at the pounds and pence of it, yes, it's a relatively low value product, but we can increase the value by its unique selling point of its quality and the brand, the marketing of what we're producing, but also the marketing. As a marketing piece, it's very important because we can show that we've got something unique, and the interest generated by that. We might grow some beautiful fruit trees, but if we can write an article in Gardens Illustrated about how we grow fruit, the value of that article in terms of marketing is far greater than the apples we'll ever produce. So well, we talked about heritage, we talked about productivity, and the third thing is the aesthetic. And for me, that comes down to the integrity of a space. What was the space designed for? What is its purpose? We talked a lot, rewind a little bit, we talked a lot about the values and the purpose of the space and the economics behind it, and we discussed about having a famous garden designer come in to make a pleasure garden, and then we could have picnics and operettas and all sorts of wonderful things up there. But then we sat down and looked at the values of the site like this, and Mr. Hoskins and Mrs. Hoskins are the most wonderful owners to work with, and we had this long chat, and Mr. Hoskins looked over his glasses and he's, you're the gardener, just go and get on with it, would you? Since then we've really been left to develop the site and get Chef to guide us with his palette in the ingredients that we grow. We're looking to find flavours that only come from a garden. The golden rule is that there must be integrity, and everything that we grow is used. It's not just a showpiece. some places do that, and that's fine, and you're still promoting growing, but we want to have integrity, that everything is grown there, is used in the restaurant, and genuinely is influenced on the food. The aspiration, sometimes we get there and sometimes we're working towards it, really from a gardener's point of view, is to have a beautiful piece of local protein and an ingredient from the vegetable garden that I like to think is as important, and they're showcased. And so we always know we're full. Chef changes his menu every month and we know roughly what he's going to want. And so we're always producing for that goal. And within that there's a wonderful bit of flexibility. And I think, Chef, you said it before, that you've got to be a really good cook as well. Like a home cook, you've got to be adaptable and be able to preserve, be able to deal with gluts. And it takes a few years, but as we progress every season it gets a bit better, and it's becoming quite fine-tuned now, which is an awful lot of fun. Have I spoken for too long yet?
No.
Just in case, can you just put your hand up if you've even been here before? About half. So just very quickly, the heritage aspect of what we do is so important, and this is a heritage garden. It's one of the most important gardens in the country in terms of history, and I'll just very quickly describe that to you, because it was built by this incredible man called William Robinson. He was born in 1838 in rural Ireland, most likely County Laois. When I go to Ireland to research this, so you know, that County Down lays a claim, as does County Dublin, Donegal. Every gardener I meet in Ireland says, he grew up down the road now. He's very popular in Ireland, and he was born in the worst times. He would have been 7 when the Great Famine started, 9 years old, the worst times, and I think it was 1852 it drew to a conclusion. But emigration has continued to devastate the island of Ireland, and it's the only country in Europe whose population hasn't increased or even gone down since those terrible times. The point is that he trained to be a garden boy at the age of 10. He was born poor, and he worked incredibly hard through this rigid system of Victorian training, and by 1862 he was actually quite experienced gardener. He came over to London, worked in the new Regent's Park Botanic Gardens, and then by 1868 he wanted to become a journalist, this poor Irish immigrant, and he packed it in to study the literature and gardens of Europe. And he taught himself French, he educated himself in the Working Man's College in Great Ormond Street, and he went on to write heaps and heaps and heaps of books, and he became probably the most influential garden writer of all time. He's largely forgotten now, but the effects or the influence of his writing are huge on landscapes all around us. And he introduced concepts that are so thrown about now, like the wild garden, like the mixed border, like developments in food growing, and this poor fellow that was born into the worst times of hunger and emigration and devastation. You can see the importance of food when you see the scale of the kitchen garden. It took him 20 years to decide the right spot to place it. We've got a beautiful book called 20 Years Work Around an Old Manor, where he describes how the landscape evolved, and only after 20 years of studying the landscape he said this is the right place to grow food, and he made the most magnificent centerpieces to produce food, and that would have fed a whole community. He lived here alone, and he wrote so many books, you see, he never married. And this is the perfect size for a bachelor pad. So we inherit this wonderful landscape along with his literature, which is so important to us, and sharing that heritage has become an integral part of the operation. And fast forward, the Canadian, he died in 1939, he was a very elderly man. Very briefly, the Canadians were here during the war, and they were too busy fighting fascism, and the garden became very neglected. And then in 1956, 57, something around then, Peter Herbert came here and established this as the first country manor hotel. He was between genius and insanity. I hope you wouldn't mind me saying this. He was a dear friend, a very eccentric but very, very clever man, and I thought wonderful person as a friend. I like to think him as a friend, but also professionally what he created here was wonderful. He restored the garden, he sort of created the idea of this country manor hotel and fine dining outside of London. And he did wonderful things until he retired in 2005. And again, these things go peaks and troughs, and there just wasn't the resources. Sadly, the hotel went into administration and the garden had become derelict again when Mr. and Mrs. Hoskins bought the place, and we've been having fun ever since, haven't we, Chef?
Trying to, yeah.
So just to give you a rough idea of the kitchen garden and what's special about this garden, if there's any questions we can answer or help with, just or maybe I've stunned you all into silence.
I'll just speak a bit about, from my point of view, what it's like. As a business, 2/3 of our revenue comes from the restaurant. So as a hotel, that's huge. And 2/3 of our restaurant guests are non-resident. So we have to be a full buzzing restaurant, open 7 days a week, lunch and dinner, to be able to support the garden, because we only have 17 bedrooms, and although they're reasonably expensive, that doesn't pay for the upkeep of the grounds. And so even just from a commercial point of view, like using all of that fruit and veg. So one thing is having a kitchen garden and the marketing value of that. And essentially you can do that by having quite a small kitchen garden. But in terms of productivity, the kitchen garden alone last year produced almost 10 tonnes of fruit, vegetables and herbs. And that doesn't include the polytunnels, the peach houses, the orchards, which would be at least the same again. So just from the kitchen garden every day, that's the equivalent of over 30 kilos every day of berries, herbs, root vegetables, brassicas, alliums coming down from the kitchen garden. During the summer months, obviously, we grow a huge amount more. The garden team collectively spend about 12 hours a day just picking things and bringing them down to the kitchen. So, and we grow a huge amount of crops specifically during those warmer 6 months to preserve and to store. We are pushing food that is higher in vegetables, partly because that is quite fashionable, I suppose, also because it massively helps in terms of food cost. So trying to offset food cost by lowering proteins, improving vegetables, is a huge help, I suppose, in that sense. It does take a lot of time and effort. Tom was talking about earlier in our directors meeting we had this morning. The main thing we have to be able to deal with is the flexibility of having gluts. So we deal with that in a number of ways. First of all, we offer a 3-course meal, a 3-course a la carte, which we intersperse with lots of intermediate dishes. All are vegetarian and all change depending on what comes down. The first course of that is we call a Gravetye garden salad, which has about 25 different elements of it, all from the garden, that's brought down sort of daily or from our preserves. So it's very, very indescript. We don't have to tell people what they're eating. We describe things as brassicas, because then we can use kales or cavaneros or kohlrabis or any of those range, or cucurbits or alliums. So we can, it doesn't matter what part is being brought down, we can mix and match, and I suppose that spontaneity is really, really crucial. Anything else? I think that's all about I'm going to say. Any questions at all?
Have you planted something that the two of you have kind of come up with? You know, have you kind of said, "Oh, I want to put this on the menu," and you've thought, "Oh God, how am I going to do that?" And have you adapted what's growing in the garden to kind of
Well, I think
enhance
George,
a dish? Or...
I've worked with some chefs and they'd say, "Can you grow me mangoes?" George is very pragmatic and quite experienced in growing food. You had an allotment when you were a kid, and so we can usually, George understands what's possible, and we can usually always meet what he wants. He's a fairly laid back kind of a chef. It's quite nice as well. So we don't get, we can always I think
definitely I think the garden and the kitchen teams come from different angles. The important thing is that we all respect each other, obviously, and work together. The gardeners generally, they want to grow the biggest vegetable possible. Look how big my onion is. And as chefs, we want tiny little delicate things.
I got a certificate from the Horticultural Society for my giant onions.
And actually, you know, the garden can see the benefit of that when, you know, you guys come and eat sometimes. We show you things in the kitchen. We get you to tasting. They understand how tender and delicate and lovely a whole something can be. On the other hand, like we got in a couple of years ago, we had beetroots, which are about 5 kilos each, They start growing their own ecosystems, and they can overwinter brilliantly. So we can be picking them in January and February, and they store in the soil, which is fantastic for us because we don't have to store them inside. And you think when you first see this 5 kilo beetroot, what on earth am I going to do with that? Like the size of a basketball. But actually, the variety we're using, they are tender throughout. Unlike, say, a huge, large parsnip, which get massively woody inside, start going slimy and brown. But these beetroots are stunning. We can't cook them in, as we would usually do, where we cook them in a stock pot, because it's like literally one beetroot per huge stock pot. So we've got around that by ordering in large compostable vacuum pack bags, where we season them and jet wash them first, and then cook them overnight in the rational ovens. And then we basically have all these huge, massive basketball-shaped sized beetroots stored and preserved inside those bags in the fridge, and the amount you can get out of those is huge. So the kitchen needs to listen to the gardeners and vice versa. And when that happens, I think it's brilliant. Anything else?
I think communication is the key, and the relationship developed with the chef. I've often seen a lot of other institutions that it's quite in vogue to have a kitchen garden with the kitchen, but when that relationship with the chef isn't quite there, it's never going to work. The chef has to be passionate, because it's a lot more work for this poor bloke.
It is.
Yeah, but the rewards.
Well, not me. It's the rest of them.
It's a lot more work for those guys. But the rewards are there, but it just needs to. What's important is to have a system so that those rewards are quite clear, how you can achieve that. I think from our side, I had a great teacher for some time, and she taught me that to be a good gardener, you have to have a lot of broad skills. You don't need to be a master, but you need to have an understanding. You have to understand art. You're never going to be a fine artist, but you have to have an understanding. You have to understand architecture. You have to understand how to deal with people. Many, many skills, but she emphasised so strongly that you have to understand good food and good cooking. You have to understand how to live well. And if you get that understanding, then you can start to apply that as a gardener. And working with chef has really given me an understanding of food. I'll never be a great chef. I can try and put a spag bowl together, but at least I can try and understand the work that's involved in elevating food to an art form, really. Culinary arts.
On that note, can I ask you a question about the Master of Culinary Arts, George?
Yep.
So George became a Master of Culinary Arts last year in our competition. How did the garden and your kitchen here and your relationship with the garden, did that inspire you in any way in terms of the Master of Culinary Arts?
Yes. I mean the brief is quite rigid in some ways, but definitely my style, I suppose, is here, and I think chefs should be a bit more chameleon-like in some ways, and here it's silly not to be. I mean, the way I look at food here is quite logical. We've got a kitchen garden. We're in an English country house hotel. We should be serving quintessential English food. Like, I don't want to serve mangoes. That's why would you? Like, so yes, I want to be using things that are bang in season, that we're growing. Yes, we have to, of course, buy in some things, but generally that's sort of mirepoix or potatoes, sort of. But yeah, I mean, so I think my style definitely is sort of dictated by that, and I suppose that the knock-on effect is that when I do things like that, yes, I want to showcase things that are bang in season, that are from what we do. And I don't know, I think I don't know, the MCA, all of the different tests over a large amount of time change that completely. So the semi-final cook-off and the final cook-off for me, because they're so sort of far apart seasonality wise, means that I'm essentially dealing with in the semi-final, and later on we're dealing with sea bass, and a nice more older lamb. So in that sense, the competition is also very seasonal. So I suppose yes. It's a short answer.
If I could just add something, I one of the greatest pleasures in my life is to be able to go up to the garden. The girls at home want their dinner, and you just, I can't be bothered to go to the shops. I hate it. And you can just go through and think, when you think of the menu as you work out what you've found, and you go home and you cook this wonderful fresh food that's completely inspired from the soil. And for me, it's so wonderful to be able to share that pleasure with the guests in its simplest form, but then to see it elevated into fine art form food. So you've got this quite humble, basic pleasure elevated to a point of fine art, and so it's a wonderful thing to share.
Anybody else have any questions?
Yeah.
So how long have you been gardening here?
Since 2010 here.
Do that. Have you seen, because you've been out there every single day working the land, in that time, how's the climate changed how you grow?
It's an interesting question. Has the climate changed to how we grow?
Has it?
Yes. However, to go further to say how it's changed is very difficult, because it's just more volatile. It seems to be that we're getting more extremes. I'd say, if I sit here and tell you we're having milder winters, then we're going to drop down to -10 next week. You know, it just seems completely unpredictable. Although storms seem stronger, heat waves seem stronger, mild wet summers seem stronger. We're all anxious about getting hotter and drier. Last year got up to 40 degrees centigrade. Best tomatoes I've ever grown in my life. But it was horrible, right? So, but what we forget is the year before that was one of the wettest summers, and this summer was actually really quite wet. It's just becoming unpredictable. Now, a lot of people are starting to advise that we shouldn't be growing certain trees because they won't survive climate change. I'm appalled by that advice, because if you don't plant a generation now, there won't be anything you're guaranteed in 100 years. So what we are doing is thinking very carefully about where we're planting replacement trees, where they've got a better chance. I'm looking at sourcing acorns to get a generation of oaks from Suffolk, where it's much drier, where they'll probably do a little bit better in a drier climate here. If those acorns grow well, it'll turn out we have a really wet climate. It's just really unpredictable. So all we can say, it's becoming more volatile and more unpredictable. I think the fears of what climate change really could bring upon us put it into insignificance, whether I'm going to be able to carry on cultivating rhododendrons or cherries. But if it affects what food we can grow, that's a big deal. That really is. And so that is really critical stuff about how food crops will evolve.
I think the advantage we have over a single farm producing a single crop is that they have to go for a variety that can withstand huge pest resistance and huge changes in that volatile climate. Whereas here, it doesn't really matter if one set of our cabbages fails, because we've got 10 other types.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter, and that's the good thing about this. So we can choose varieties that are far less resistant, and go for flavour, and rather than having to choose other, what a standard sort of farmer would, or spend huge amounts of money on polytunnels or heating or control.
I'd say that's one of the many beauties of it, George, because that year when the tomatoes were like candy, you only get that once, or when we get a really hard frost and the cabbages suddenly are really sweet, or certainly with the fruit crops, every year is slightly different, and I guess maybe that affects the menu in different ways,
of course,
slightly, and that's again just it's something completely unique. And whereas in commercial horticulture, I studied commercial horticulture before I realised it could be quite tedious. We have to have uniformity. For everything has to be exactly uniform to be able to be sold, for economic reasons, for packaging, and so that in its nature homogenises our menus and our food. So it's quite nice that to have that variety, which puts more work for the chef if every carrot is wonky.
But it must make it more inspiring for you too. The different flavours coming through.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you've got to do less to it. I mean,
Yeah.
but it's just being clever and using things differently. I mean, purees, consommes are perfect because it's a very elegant, sophisticated, beautiful thing to have. but it can be made out of things that are really, really ugly. And this is so huge amounts of like oils, huge amounts of purees, lots and lots of infusions, ice creams, anything like that, any sort of green herb that bolts and grows like lovage or nasturtium, make beautiful, beautiful ice creams. And yeah, so it's just being clever, I think, and spontaneous as well, which is difficult when you have something that has to be so consistent. So, but anyway.
There's another challenge. I hope you don't mind me sharing this, George, but some ingredients that you get from the vegetable garden are so beautiful just as they are.
Yeah.
And the way to enjoy them is just to eat them off the bush. Or, for example, a new potato fresh out of the ground, it just needs a little bit of mint and butter. A blueberry should just be eaten immediately raw. And when chef is trying to elevate food to this art form, the poor bloke, before he was here, I planted a small, large planting of blueberries because they're so delicious. And poor Georgie said, for 12 years I've been trying to work out what I can do as a chef to elevate this, and it's stumped you, hasn't it?
Yeah, so now we just serve a pot of blueberries as a
What can you do? You know, they're just beautiful as they are.
I can't think of anything better than just eating blueberries off the bush.
But this is a challenge for a chef, because if we're having very simple but high quality ingredients, for a chef to elevate, it becomes as if you don't mind me using your words, but I find that quite interesting, George, that extra challenge.
Another thing, this is more than gardener, how do you deal with pests and birds? And
I asked them politely to leave, sir.
With a gun.
Yeah. Oh, there are various nasty tricks. Have you seen that Peter Rabbit movie? I went to watch it with my daughter when she was 2, and we came winter time in the cinema, her first trip to the cinema, and then we came to the garden after the cinema, just getting dusk. I said, "Did you enjoy that movie, darling?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "What do you think of Mr. McGregor?" "Horrible," she said. So, I sympathise with the guy. So we've got fruit cages to keep nasty creatures off the most prized crops, and we net other crops. Main pests are grey squirrels and pigeons. We have to fleece our brassicas to keep the pigeons off, and there's other things. Once had it served with foie gras and spiced lentils. Wood pigeon was very beautiful, because it's quite a dry meat, wood pigeon, but the juice of the foie gras, exquisite. So there's things you can do about wood pigeons. And cabbage white butterflies, we've got an organic control called dipel, which is a bacteria that we spray on, that gives them a bad tummy. So we're managing to garden organically, fairly, just using a few tricks and techniques. We don't have organic certification because of the work involved and the restrictions and the amount of bureaucracy that's put on with us. When you think about it, organic as a marketing label, we don't necessarily need that, because we've got our very strong own brand and we've got our own ethics, and I'm ethically comfortable with the way that we garden. So we can say that we garden organically, but we are not certified organic. Yeah, it's as a gardener, you just spend your life fighting nature, really. That's all you're doing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I do.
One here.
Hi, George.
Hiya.
Yeah, we've been fortunate enough to have our kitchen garden now for about 25 years, and the most important thing, I think, is for the relationship between the chef and the gardener, because chefs, from my opinion, from my experience, want to jot down things that they'd like to do at any one time, but all of a sudden there is a gardener telling them what's available and they have to use, and it takes a very special sort of chef to actually get in line with a gardener and do what he wants them to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So congratulations, first of all, on your
Thanks.
relationship, because it's obvious that it's a great one.
Yeah.
Another little point is it's about educating people, isn't it? People in the kitchen. We've spent thousands and thousands of pounds putting in a rabbit fence all the way round that was dug in 2 feet into the ground. But if the chefs, when they're going home, 11 o'clock at night or whatever it is,
Leave the
garden gate open, the rabbits just come in through the garden gate and destroy everything. So it's about educating people, and and having an open mind is obviously what you two have, and it's great to see.
Yeah. No, it's definitely the case is that there is feedback that I can give to Tom, but that takes years to come into fruition. Like we can...
Like our plum trees.
Yeah. We probably might not even be here by the time they're fruiting, but we want to talk about it and start an extra orchard, and that might be 5, 6, 7, 8 years before we get any sort of decent fruit. But why are we doing it? Not because Tom might be here, I might be here. It's not about whether we're going to be here or not. It's about what we think should happen here, and that's about Gravetye. Really, that's not about us. That's not about our opinions, I suppose. But yeah, 100%. If I want to change a dish as a chef, you can just plate it up a different way. Like 10 minutes time, we're going to plate this dish differently. If I want to change what's coming from the garden, you can't do that. As a chef, you're asking the impossible. So you've just got to realise that some years you might get blight and there won't be any tomatoes. That's it. You just got to deal with it. We just put something else on the menu, and that communication from the garden to the kitchen is crucial.
That's never happened yet, though. We've always...
Yeah. But everything isn't what you expect it to be, and like you were right in saying, from a chef's point of view, you have to communicate with the garden, understand what's coming down, and work with it. That's our job, I
think it's a wonderful point about educating the chefs. In the old days, you might get a phone call in October. Have you got any red currants? So we've really got an educated team in there, and that's all about enthusing and staff retention. Very tricky and important for us all. And also, lockdown was great in a way that we had a couple of 3 chefs that worked really closely with us, and so we got that good understanding and relationship. But also the gardeners, keeping them educated about horticulture, but understanding cooking. The most exciting thing is if we can have a guest that comes here and has the most wonderful beans and goes up and sees them, and then they're inspired to go home and do that themselves. So always trying to spread that enthusiasm and passion for what we do, really. And yeah, if anyone takes that home from here, that's a good thing.
Thank you. I want to say thank you. I mean, the symbiotic relationship between the two of you is completely obvious, and the creativity and the passion. And you mentioned the word flair, and there was tons of flair on those dishes today. The ingredients were beautiful, and the creativity and the flavours were fantastic. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Do you have any general questions about the academy or a doctor's school or any future plans? Or does anybody want to go out and have a quick look at the garden? Yes? Okay. Well, let's leave it there then. Thank you very much to Gravetye, to the entire team.
Would you like me to talk about... I can meet you in the kitchen garden if anyone's specially keen. But I've bored you enough. So I'm just going to be up there, and you can chat to me if you want to. Yeah, but I'll be up there in 5 minutes if anyone wants to see it.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
It'd be better if I showed them the way.
Yeah, possibly. Thank you.